He walked into his own studio, believing he was in control. But then, Melania Trump turned his own tactics against him, leaving him speechless on live TV. The cameras rolled, and the polished set of Spotlight Hour gleamed under the bright studio lights. The show had built a reputation for its no-holds-barred approach. Tough questions weren't just expected, they were the main event. The audience, a mix of fans and skeptics, sat on the edge of their seats, anticipating the night's big moment. At the center of it all sat Melania Trump. Dressed in an elegant, understated silk blouse and impeccably tailored trousers, she looked as composed as ever. Her posture was flawless, her expression neutral yet unreadable. A woman who had been scrutinized, criticized, admired, and underestimated for years. And still, no one seemed to truly understand her. Across from her, the host adjusted his earpiece, flashed a knowing smirk, and leaned back in his chair with casual confidence. He was a media veteran, a master of turning interviews into viral moments, baiting public figures into saying something that would explode online. He had gone head-to-head with politicians, actors, and CEOs, always pushing the limits between journalism and provocation. And tonight, he was ready to take control once again. The first few minutes of the interview followed the usual script. Questions about her post-White House life, her initiatives, her time as First Lady. Melania responded in her signature measured tone, offering just enough to answer, but never enough to be dissected. But then, something shifted. The host's smile was just a little too tight, his laughter a little too forced. The audience could sense it. He was waiting for the moment to flip the narrative, to turn Melania Trump into just another guest who had walked into his arena unprepared. Yet the plan wasn't working. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't flustered. In fact, she wasn't giving him much to work with at all. So his tactics changed. Leaning forward, elbows on the glossy desk, his expression sharpened. The charm faded, replaced by something more familiar: condescension. Melania noticed immediately. She had seen this before. Different faces, different settings, same strategy. They came at her with polished arrogance, convinced they had already figured her out. They framed her as a passive observer in her own story, as if she had merely stood beside power rather than held her own within it. He smirked, believing she wouldn't see what was coming. But she did. The host tapped his fingers against the desk, his smirk widening. He had spent years perfecting his approach, slowly tightening the net around his guests, luring them into a false sense of security before delivering the blow that would send social media into a frenzy. He adjusted his suit, took a breath, and went in. "So, Melania," he started, drawing out her name with deliberate ease, "now that you've had some time away from Washington, what's life like? I imagine it must be nice to finally relax." A simple question, on the surface. But the way he said it, as if she had spent her years in the White House lounging around, left a bitter taste in the air. Melania didn't blink. She nodded slightly, choosing her words with precision. "I focus on my work, my initiatives, my family." Her accent, smooth and deliberate, made every syllable land exactly where she wanted it. The host gave a slow nod, pretending to consider her answer. Right. Be best, wasn't it?" He chuckled under his breath, just enough for the audience to hear. "That was your anti-bullying campaign." The phrasing wasn't outright disrespectful, but the undertone was clear. That little thing. Melania's face remained unreadable. The host continued, shifting in his seat. "I have to ask, though," he said, tilting his head, "do you think it really made an impact? I mean, let's be honest. There were a lot of people who didn't quite get it." A few muffled chuckles rippled through the audience. The host's specialty was making statements sound like innocent observations, even when they carried sharp edges. He wasn't outright insulting her. He was daring her to take offense. Melania exhaled softly. She had dealt with this before. Still, he wasn't done. He leaned forward now, sensing an opportunity. "Some people felt it was ironic given, well, certain figures in your circle." His sly smile said everything. The audience caught on. A louder chuckle, a few scattered claps. The moment stretched. Most guests would have shifted in their seats, glanced at the camera, laughed nervously, or offered a vague diplomatic response. Melania did none of that. Instead, she remained perfectly still, watching him with the kind of calm that makes people uncomfortable. The host hesitated for just a fraction of a second. She had seen the tactic before. Laugh it off, let the audience take the cue to mock, and then, once the subject was softened up, deliver the real hit. And then it came. Let's be real, Melania. You were First Lady, but you weren't exactly out there, were you? The audience chuckled again, louder this time. The words were meant to sound like a joke, but they weren't. They were calculated, carefully chosen to diminish her. Melania's fingers twitched slightly against her lap, not in discomfort, in calculation, because she knew exactly what she was about to do, and the host had no idea what was coming. The room was still chuckling when she tilted her head slightly, just enough to let him know she had heard him, not just his words, but the intent behind them. And then, with measured control, she spoke. "Let me ask you something," she said, her voice even, unshaken. "You say people didn't see me, but tell me, what is it that you think you saw?" The host blinked. Melania didn't wait for him to respond. "I was First Lady of the United States. I represented this country across the world. I visited hospitals, schools, communities in crisis. I met with leaders, with families who had lost everything. And yet, because I did not perform for the cameras the way you wanted, you say I was not present?" The audience was no longer laughing. The host opened his mouth as if to interject, but Melania continued, her voice steady and deliberate. "In America, we say we believe in strength, in privacy, in dignity. But when a woman does not perform the way you expect, when she does not shout to prove herself, you say she is not there." The cameras caught the host's expression. He wasn't smiling anymore. Melania leaned back, smoothing an invisible crease from her blouse. "I have been many things," she said, "but I have never been invisible. And that is why we are sitting here today." "No." A beat, then applause. It started slow, hesitant, then it grew.